I want to quickly talk about coastlines, because we tend to think of coastlines as inherently fixed things that don't change much, but the reality is they did, and they have done, and they will continue to do so. And certainly back in antiquity, some of the coastlines looked a lot different than they do today. Let me give you some examples. I thought I'd start close to home. In AD 43, Rome invaded Britain, and they landed a force in the southeast of it at a location called Richboro, which is in modern-day Kent. This map shows you the shoreline of the day, and as you can see, Richboro was on a little island, and therefore an obvious place we might want to land a force. Of course, today it's inland by, I think, a couple kilometres. In fact, you can see what is the modern-day coastline in grey. So it looks a lot different back then, and suddenly it makes a lot of sense as to why Rome would have wanted to land there. Next up, Rome, or rather Italy. I've used this image before because it's a great way of understanding what I'm trying to illustrate to you. So up there is actually the airport that you'd fly into Rome on, and just below it you can see a hexagonal basin. That was Portus, which was Rome's main port of the imperial period, and it was right on the sea. And in fact, if you just go south and on that hook of the River Tiber, that's Ostia, which was really famous and an earlier port, although Ostia was a river port, so it wasn't directly on the sea. But as you can see, the coastline's changed dramatically. It's really grown out into the sea. Next up is Ephesus, and if you ever get the chance to go, do so. It's absolutely stunning. So Ephesus again was another harbour city, but of course now, as you can see, it's quite a distance from the coastline. There is a slight difference here, because Ephesus was in a bay, and it was on the southern banks of what was a large bay. So it wasn't necessarily that the coastline was all the way in. It was rather that that area north of it was, well, one big bay. And finally, Troy. Yeah, I know this would be a bit surprising. After all, you think of Troy and you think of lots of myth, but don't forget that it was or is an archaeological site. It physically exists. And as such, work's been done on the landscape around it to understand how that landscape has changed. And as you can see, what a change. The present day coastline means that much of what would have existed as water is now modern day land. It's a good example with coastlines of how things aren't always consistent, how landscapes can change over time. And the caveat is obviously that not every single coastline changed that dramatically, but when they did, it's important to know how, and therefore it can give us a better understanding of how things would have existed back then. And if you like this kind of thing, by the way, don't forget, click follow.